Hello, and welcome to Tax and Tech, a Deloitte podcast focused on helping you navigate the ever-changing tax technology landscape through insightful conversations with Deloitte technology leaders. I'm your host, Emily Van Vliet, a partner in our tax management consulting practice here at Deloitte. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of Tax and Tech, which is our Deloitte tax podcast focused on all of your tax technology needs and issues. Technology is advancing so rapidly that it can be hard sometimes for tax leaders to keep up. And so we have created this podcast as an effort to help set up some conversations with our own Deloitte tax technology leaders to provide insights and perspectives that will hopefully help our listeners navigate the shifting tax technology landscape as you chart your tax department's digital future. I am very excited today to have both a very, interesting topic planned as well as a very dynamic leader in our practice here to speak. So here with me today is Jen Knickerbocker, who is the global practice leader for our Global Compliance and Reporting Services. So Jen, thank you so much for joining this podcast episode.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I'm happy to be here.
Great. And we do have a really exciting topic, so certainly something that we haven't really addressed on another episode. And it relates to a survey that our Deloitte team has completed recently all about the global management of tax. And this is a fairly long-running survey, right, Jen? Do you want to start by just giving us some background on this survey that we'll be sharing results from?
Sure. Yes. As you mentioned, the survey focuses on the global management of tax, and we've been conducting this since 2010. We commissioned this biennial independent global market research study with senior tax leaders. So this is our fifth and most recent edition.
Okay, great. And there's something a little bit different about how we ran the survey this time around. Is that right?
There is. The survey is always focused on constantly shifting challenges and priorities that are facing tax leaders with global organizations. And historically, we have interviewed only the senior tax leaders. This year, we decided to do some in-depth discussion-based interviews with CFOs and CAOs, Chief Accounting Officers, selected from the largest global organizations. And we did that because we wanted to understand where there was alignment and where there might be differences between the views of the senior tax leaders and the stakeholders that are very important to them in their organizations, the chief accounting officers and chief financial officers as well.
Okay, great. So why don't we start there? Because I'm sure our audience will be interested in those CFO perspectives. What sorts of things did you learn through those interviews?
Well, it was good news because what we took away from it is that the CFOs, CAOs, they view tax as being very effective at managing risks, and primarily risks related to, tax risks themselves. So missing filings, penalties, avoiding penalties, those types of risks, as well as managing the financial statement risks. So ensuring that there would not be a restatement of financial statements. They also see tax as starting to make progress in terms of partnering with the business. So beginning to see a lot more of the proactive involvement in broader business strategy and matters by tax. They also believe that tax does a great job of managing tax expense itself. So ensuring that you're not overpaying tax in the jurisdictions around the world in which they're doing business. And they also are starting to see tax begin to deliver some efficiencies. They've attributed some of that to technology, and mostly they measure those efficiencies in terms of cost management. But those were very positive responses in terms of what they felt tax did well today. When we asked them what their expectations were of tax in the future, we got some very interesting perspectives there. Many of them were envisioning a future where the tax compliance process is fully automated, and probably the average time frame in which they indicated they felt like that was a reasonable expectation was about 5 years. Because of that, see the opportunity for tax to refocus. Instead of spending as much time and effort and energy on reporting, which is looking backwards at data that is, old, because when you're doing tax compliance, you're doing that based on things that have already happened, and it's just a matter of reporting that. They see the opportunity for tax to really begin to face forward and look ahead and see what's around the corner. And because of that, they feel like it'll be very important for tax to develop these skills in their team, to really understand analytics, to understand what it means to be digital, and to be able to take advantage of the evolving and advancing technologies that are out there today.
Yeah, definitely. So looking forward, definitely a need to start shifting focus and build the skills that will allow you to do that. What you just mentioned, Jen, around the compliance process fully automated within 5 years, that's an interesting expectation, right? I'm curious, what is your own point of view around that?
I think, they always say that we underestimate what's going to happen in 5 years, but certainly that feels aggressive, particularly on a global basis. I think that will be the case in some elements of tax. When you look at the transaction tax and where the world is going in terms of real-time reporting, I think that's you'll see more and more of that, and so that might be largely automated in 5 years. Other elements of it, I think, may lag a little, but I do think that we will see significant advances in automation. May not be fully automated, but we will see significant advances in automation over the next 5 years.
Okay, great. Yeah, and probably a variety of technologies. I can just imagine, multiple technologies being involved to really automate something end to end. And you had mentioned, I think at the outset, that maybe there are also some areas of misalignment between CFOs and tax leaders. Are there any kind of areas where you think maybe tax professionals and their stakeholders are not so well aligned?
Probably one of the bigger ones that I saw was with respect to the investment in technology. And so what we found was where companies reported that they have spent significantly in terms of investments in technology and potentially automation, the senior tax leaders felt very confident that they had very effective processes in place, that they had the ability to draw insights from large amounts of data. I think the proliferation of the amount of data that we have available to us every day just continues to grow and grow and grow, and that's going to continue to be a challenge. But they felt confident that they had the tools that they needed to be able to draw insights from that, and that they were able to have time or capacity to focus in areas to help to identify risk and to identify opportunities. The CFO's view was that they still felt like they were waiting to see the ROI on some of those investments, and mentioned that where significant investments in technology had taken place, that they felt that they would be seeing that, but maybe weren't seeing it yet. And some of the quotes that I have as I'm looking back through some of this technology are that I really need for my teams to be people who curate data and systems, who really understand systems and analytical review capabilities. That's one quote. And another was, I really need my tax department to provide business-based tax advice. And so some of it may just be, it may be a matter of time, right? The first year you get everything efficient and you start to get things under control, and you begin to identify where the opportunities are, to invest the time to anticipate what challenges are ahead, and to make sure that you're on top of managing risk. But some of it also may be just in terms of how value is defined. And we've been investigating that a little deeper, trying to understand what CFOs mean by value, to ensure that it aligns with what tax professionals view as value, so that we can make sure that the organization is understanding and valuing the contributions that are being made by tax.
Yeah, so maybe a bit of a transition period then is what we're still experiencing between some of those technology investments and then ultimately a payoff that a CFO can really, recognize in terms of value.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I think. And certainly when we did press them on what does value mean to them, I don't think we'll see a lot of misalignment there, but the three that really stood out, the first was about managing risk, and they don't just mean tax risk in terms of penalties and interest or in terms of misstatements, but they're really looking at protecting the organization's reputation, the reputational risk, understanding what's on the horizon in terms of new taxes as the world changes and becomes much more digital. The taxes that are out there themselves are also changing, and they see some risk in terms of making sure that that's understood, what that's going to look like and what the impact is on the business and how to plan effectively for it, as well as avoiding disruption to mission critical activities. And I think as you start to move to real-time reporting in many of these countries, there's concern that if you don't have your data in order and you don't get it right, that it can result in some pretty significant impacts, including things like having a certificate of good standing revoked in a certain country, which would mean that you would have to stop your business there for some time, or that you would have to pay to play, which we're already seeing in some of the countries where some of these things are taking effect, that if you can't stay on top of everything, then there's a risk that your business itself is disrupted. So it's more than just the tax risk. The second one is about reducing costs, and I think that tax is just going to continue to feel that pressure, those cost pressures, and making sure that they're not just looking at the cost of tax itself, but also the cost of the management of tax, so the cost of the operations. And technology will be a big enabler to help to achieve those objectives in the future. And then the third was really about facing the future and navigating uncertainty. And I think that evolving technology is going to be absolutely critical to really interpret those increasing data volumes and be able to draw clarity from ambiguity, consider the possibilities, and make sure that the plan that you have in place is agile enough to accommodate the impact of all of the changing factors on the horizon.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're raising data as well, because honestly, when you mentioned completely automating the compliance process end to end, that's the first thing that I thought of, is how on earth are we going to get enough data to allow that to be possible, right? So I'm glad you're emphasizing that also. Okay, and then Jen, I also just heard you say that there's pressure to stay on top of everything. And we do need to stay on top of everything from a risk management standpoint, right? But that's becoming increasingly difficult to do. Technology can be a part of that equation, but I also believe that we're seeing different types of operating models also being considered as companies are trying to figure out how they can really stay on top of everything. So what sort of information around, operating models or delivery models or centralization did you get from the survey?
Well, while there's no perfect model, organizations are really starting to understand the need to revisit the composition. An operating model is people, process, data, technology, and governance, and consider each of those 5 elements and how they should configure that to be most effective. And when they look at those internal tax operating models, the intention is to provide greater value to all of the key stakeholders. In order to do that, what we saw from the survey results is that tax departments are looking towards centralization of some of the work that they're doing. In fact, 81% said they now operate some form of centralized global tax delivery model, and there's a desire to shift even more of that in the future.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, certainly a lot of change going on in that area. So Jen, I think I would maybe just pose a question for you. I'm curious about your perspective on kind of what you see happening globally around the management of tax versus maybe what we see in the U.S. around management of tax. And I know you have that global lens because of your role in our firm. So is there anything in particular that you would, kind of highlight that you see going on globally that you would really highlight for awareness purposes for our U.S. teams? Any kind of discrepancies or just observations around those global versus U.S. dynamics?
Yes, definitely. So I think on the global front, the biggest area of focus that I see companies really grappling with right now relates to real-time reporting and SAFTI and other real-time reporting requirements. And it's really driving an investment in technology. 56% of the respondents to our survey said they've already increased their digital and technology investment. And of that 56%, 70% said it was because of the SAFTI and other real-time reporting requirements that they were doing. So I think that's only going to continue, and more countries are going to really be moving in that direction. And when you combine that with the sharing of information cross-border and what we've seen as a result of the OECD movements, you're really getting to a place where that understanding your data and getting it in one place and making sure that you're going all the way back to the moment of record, that's where the tax decisions are making place, and you're ensuring that everything is getting recorded accurately as the transactions occur, is just going to be a really big challenge. But so it will be really important that companies also invest at a very fast pace so that they can keep up and be prepared for that in the future.
Yeah, that certainly will mean a sea change, especially, if you contrast that to what you mentioned earlier around tax departments historically having spent so much time looking backwards, right? We potentially, there's a future where we won't be looking backwards at all. And both our taxpayers and our regulators will all be, really watching data more real time.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of that, as well as just the fact that they're really focused on trying to make sure that they are managing risk effectively. One of the other things that we see, in addition to just the technology investments, is that many companies are really moving to try to get visibility into their markets. And so getting all of their tax information in one place in an organized, integrated platform has been a very important piece of that, but also finding ways to cut through that information overload and draw insights through analytics themselves across all of their countries, all the jurisdictions in which they do business, to help them to really identify where their risks are, ensure that their positions are consistent around the world. But that's also a driver, is really just trying to get to that visibility, transparency, that sense of control that many are looking for.
Right. Yeah. And that again makes the case for the changing skill set of the tax professional. Right. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, I appreciate those insights, Jen. That's been very helpful. And so when we publish this podcast episode, we'll do our best to also provide some information on where you can find more about the survey results that Jen has been sharing with us. And then to the extent that some of our listeners here are also starting to think about their data challenges, we have other episodes that do relate to SAP and Oracle and similar ERP type of migrations. Also have another episode really kind of focused on the skill sets of the tax department, and we've called that the power of with. So I would encourage everyone to maybe go back and look at those earlier episodes if you've missed them. I would also encourage you to subscribe to our Tax and Tech podcast wherever you do your podcast listening, so that you don't miss any of our episodes going forward. We do have much more to come around technology, as well as how technology is starting to impact particular areas of tax, things like multi-state and VAT. So we'll have more on that in upcoming episodes. Jen, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time and appreciate your being willing to share with our audience some of those kind of new observations based on our latest survey.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me be here. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's been my pleasure.
Great. Thanks very much. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I do hope you'll subscribe. But until our next episode, thank you from Jen and from me and from the rest of us here at Deloitte Tax. And finally, I would encourage you to subscribe to our Tax and Tech podcast series wherever you are listening in today, so that you don't miss any of our episodes. We have episodes coming up around cloud ERP systems, tax technology updates related to U.S. tax reform, and many other timely topics connected to tax technology. So a big thank you to everyone listening in. I hope you will join us again as we continue to chart the tax department's digital future on another episode of Tax and Tech. Thanks very much.